The polished glass doors of La Rue Blouin parted with a soft chime, inviting Maya Jordan into a world of jasmine, suede, and supple leather. This was no ordinary shop. It was the kind of place whispered about in high-fashion circles, where dresses costing thousands hung on velvet hangers and stylists knew your name if they considered you important. Maya, a 16-year-old with an inner blend of grace and fire, moved with the quiet assurance of someone who understood her own value, even if the world didn't always see it. This morning marked her first solo train ride into Manhattan, a handwritten list clutched in her hand alongside a small note from her father. Find what makes you feel powerful. Love, Dad. Today was more than just a shopping trip. It was a significant milestone. She had grown up watching her father, Malcolm Jordan, command rooms with purpose, not arrogance. A self-made tech magnate, Malcolm had built his empire on two pillars: brilliance and unshakable integrity. Though Maya had never used his name to her advantage, he had taught her how to navigate any space with her head held high. The boutique radiated a silent opulence. Cashmere throws were folded like secrets and crystal chandeliers hung in delicate stillness. Maya let out a slow breath, a faint smile touching her lips. She wasn't intimidated, she was prepared. Dressed in a simple yet elegant beige sweater, high-waisted slacks and ankle boots, she was intentional in her style. Her natural curls were gathered in a loose bun, and her lips had just enough gloss to catch the light. She didn't need to prove her right to be there. She already knew she belonged. The gala was 3 weeks away, an annual benefit for underprivileged youth sponsored by her father. It would be packed with dignitaries, artists and CEOs. This year, for the first time, Maya would attend on her own, stepping into the spotlight solo. She desired a dress that was a reflection of herself, a fusion of composure, strength and inner fire. And she was certain this boutique held it. As she browsed, her fingers tracing the texture of silks and sequins, she didn't notice the woman who entered behind her. Claire Whitmore moved with the effortless stride of someone who had never heard the word no. Clad in ivory cashmere and designer heels, she entered the boutique with the air of a queen returning to her throne. She gave the staff a brief, dismissive nod and immediately surveyed the racks until her eyes settled on Maya. There was no visible shock, just a slight tightening of her jaw. To Claire, the sight of a young black girl alone in a boutique of this caliber wasn't merely unexpected. It was a disruption. It pricked at a subconscious, deeply ingrained belief that wealth and refinement were reserved for a certain kind of person, and Maya didn't fit that mold. What began as a quiet disapproval quickly sharpened. Claire watched as Maya's fingers lingered on a sapphire gown. She observed her speaking softly to a stylist, who smiled and handed her a key to the fitting rooms. She saw Maya disappear behind the velvet curtain with a quiet self-possession that clashed with every assumption Claire held. Just like that, the story Claire had already written in her mind, the one where girls like Maya were invisible, out of place or silent, began to unravel. Maya was unaware, but this small, personal triumph of choosing a dress that would make her feel radiant was about to be twisted into a confrontation she had never sought. In the very place where she had hoped to celebrate her independence and joy, she would instead face the sharp sting of entitlement, masquerading as elegance. A smile still lingered on Maya's lips as she emerged from the fitting room in a deep emerald gown, the fabric flowing like water. She looked in the mirror and saw the future she was building, one that didn't ask for permission. But in a corner of the room a voice was already starting to rise, low and cold. "Excuse me, is she even supposed to be here?" The storm was gathering and Maya Jordan, whether she knew it or not, was about to show the entire boutique, and the world, what true dignity looked like. The gentle click of Maya Jordan's heels on the boutique's marble floor was a steady rhythm in a silent space. Her emerald dress trailed behind her, elegant and deliberate, as she approached a mirror framed by gold sconces. For a moment, it was just her and her reflection. A young woman standing tall, beautiful and unafraid. The soft light kissed her skin, the rich green fabric accentuated the fire in her eyes, and her every feature declared one thing: she belonged. Then came the disturbance, a barely audible whisper from across the boutique. A slow, almost imperceptible glance from a woman in ivory cashmere, clutching a pearl-studded bag like a symbol of superiority. Claire Whitmore had been watching, waiting for the right moment. Not because Maya had done anything wrong, but because her mere presence was an insult to Claire's worldview. Claire had lived a life where her wealth and whiteness were her personal assistants, clearing her path and ensuring she was met with smiles. She wasn't accustomed to being challenged, not with words and certainly not by someone's assumptions about her. But Maya's confidence, the genuine joy in her movements, did something Claire couldn't explain. It pierced. It unsettled. It offended. So she did what people like her often do when their unearned comfort feels threatened. She disguised her prejudice as concern for propriety. As Maya stood admiring herself, Claire approached a nearby sales associate with a disapproving expression. "Is she being helped?" she asked, her words soft but heavy with insinuation. The startled associate quickly nodded. "Yes, she's trying on pieces for the Blake Foundation Gala. She's one of the guests." Claire's lips tightened. "Really? That's quite unexpected." She didn't need to say more. The weight of her tone was enough. Minutes later, Claire sauntered past Maya, stopping just short of brushing her shoulder. Her eyes flitted to the gown Maya wore. "That's a striking color," she said, her voice cloyingly sweet. "A very brave choice." Maya smiled politely. "Thank you." Claire's gaze lingered a second too long. "Are you shopping for someone?" "No," Maya replied calmly. "For myself." "Oh," Claire said, her eyebrows arching in practiced surprise. "Well, good for you." The words seemed harmless, but Maya knew better. There was always a hidden meaning in the pleasantries of people like Claire, a coded message in the syllables. And though she didn't yet know the full extent of what was coming, she understood this. She was being watched not as a customer but as an intruder. Claire moved on, her heels tapping sharply, and Maya turned back to the mirror, adjusting the fit at her waist. But the atmosphere had changed. A heavy feeling hung in the air. Behind her, Claire approached the manager, a young woman named Elise who had recently taken over. Claire spoke in a hushed but pointed voice. "I'm a little concerned," she began, her tone implying authority rather than simple alarm. "I saw that girl slip something into her purse earlier. I didn't want to say anything at first, but now I feel I should." Elise blinked, confused. "Are you sure?" "I've shopped here for over a decade," Claire said, crossing her arms. "You know me. I wouldn't say something without a reason." In a boutique where image was everything and regular clients held invisible power, Elise's posture stiffened. She didn't want to believe it, but her uncertainty grew. She glanced at Maya, who was now laughing softly with another associate, completely oblivious to the storm Claire was quietly brewing. "I think it would be wise," Claire added, "to check her bag before anything else happens." Elise hesitated. The store's policy was clear. Never accuse, never assume, always verify. But the power dynamic was undeniable. Claire's patronage mattered. Her opinions were not easily dismissed. In that moment of pressure, Elise made a choice she would come to regret. A few minutes later, as Maya stepped out in a new dress, a soft, champagne-colored silk that shimmered like liquid light, Elise approached her with an apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said gently, "but we've had a report. Would you mind if I just checked your purse?" Maya froze, blinking. "What?" "It's just routine," Elise said quickly. "A customer. It's just for security. I hope you understand." A hush fell over the room. One by one, other shoppers turned their heads. The woman in the corner stopped browsing. The couple by the jewelry case stiffened. Claire, standing several feet away, observed it all with an air of faux detachment. Maya swallowed hard. "You want to search my bag?" Elise faltered slightly. "It's just to clear things up." "No one else has been asked that," Maya said, her voice low but firm. "Only me." The manager shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just following protocol." "No, you're following her lead," Maya retorted, her eyes flicking toward Claire. Every part of her wanted to yell, to leave, to cry, but she did none of those things. Instead, she unzipped her purse and handed it over, her jaw set, her back straight. Elise went through the contents. Lip gloss, a cell phone, a wallet, a folded invitation to the gala. She looked up. "There's nothing here," she murmured. "Of course there isn't," Maya said sharply. Claire shrugged from across the room. "Sometimes people just get careless." No apology, no shame. Just the smug satisfaction of someone who believed her social status protected her from any repercussions. But what Claire didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Maya had made a call during her last fitting. And at that very moment, A black car had pulled up just outside the boutique doors. Inside was the man who had founded the foundation that sponsored the gala. The man whose company owned the very boutique they were standing in. The man whose daughter had just been unjustly accused. Maya looked toward the door and exhaled. Her voice rang out with a quiet fire. I think you're going to want to stay for what happens next. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk, where the constant buzz of shoppers and traffic continued, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing inside the boutique. But for Maya Jordan, everything had changed the moment she was asked to open her purse. The humiliation settled on her shoulders like a weight she was all too familiar with, but she refused to bear it without resistance. As she stood under the disapproving glares of strangers and the smug satisfaction of Claire Whitmore, Maya felt something awaken within her. Not fear, not even fury, but something older and deeper. A voice that echoed from every woman before her who had been judged without being known. And that voice said, "Stand up." So she did. She looked directly at the manager, Elise, who handed back her purse with a barely audible apology, and then at Claire, who had already turned away as if her false accusation could be forgotten so easily. The air was thick with tension, yet no one moved. No customer intervened. No associate stepped forward. The silence was a verdict in itself. Maya reached into her purse again, not to defend herself but to make a call. Her hand was steady as she scrolled to the name she needed. Her voice didn't tremble when she pressed the button. She held the phone to her ear and with quiet certainty said 5 words. "Dad, I need you here." Miles away, in a boardroom on the top floor of a glass tower bearing his name, Elijah Jordan paused mid-sentence. He had been reviewing a proposal, surrounded by executives eager for his approval, when his phone vibrated. Normally he wouldn't have answered during a meeting, but the name glowing on his screen made everything else fade away. He excused himself without a word, stepped into the corridor and answered. "Maya." There was no panic in her voice, just clarity. "I'm at the Meridian Boutique on 5th, she said. "There's been a situation. Someone accused me of stealing. I'm okay, but you need to come." There was a long pause, the kind that carried history. Elijah didn't ask for details. He knew the tone in his daughter's voice. He had heard it before, in his mother, his wife, his colleagues. The quiet tone black women use when dignity is their only shield in rooms where they've been made to feel small. He ended the call with a simple, "I'm on my way." Back in the boutique, Maya stood near the mirror once more. The same mirror that had reflected her joy only moments before now mirrored her strength. Claire continued to browse, pretending she hadn't caused a scene. Elise busied herself behind the counter, her nerves visible in the way she kept rearranging receipts and fidgeting with a pen. The other shoppers whispered, some too ashamed to meet Maya's gaze, others simply curious to see how the drama would unfold. 20 minutes passed. Then the boutique's glass doors opened with a soft chime, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Elijah Jordan entered not like a tycoon or a billionaire CEO but like a father. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his presence was understated yet commanding. There was no need for introductions. Every staff member in the room recognized him immediately. Elijah was the man behind Jordan and Kin, one of the largest real estate and luxury retail conglomerates in the country, the man who had revitalized entire city blocks with his vision of inclusive luxury. And the boutique they were standing in was one of his. Maya turned to face him. Her composure hadn't broken, but when she saw her father, something in her softened. She knew she wasn't alone. Elijah walked directly to her and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low but filled with concern. She nodded. "I am now." Then Elijah turned to the room. The whispers ceased. Even Claire, with her back to him, felt the sudden gravity. She turned slowly, expecting a store manager or perhaps another customer coming to Maya's defense. But when she saw Elijah, her breath hitched. Claire's face paled as recognition dawned. She had seen him before. In Forbes, in Vogue Business, on magazine covers, at her country club. She had once referred to his success as an anomaly during a luncheon. Now that anomaly stood before her and he was not smiling. Elijah didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. "Which one of you accused my daughter?" he asked, his tone as calm as a lake but as cold as ice. No one spoke. Claire stepped forward, trying to regain control. "There's been a misunderstanding. I simply expressed a concern." "You didn't express concern," Elijah said, cutting her off with surgical precision. You made an accusation. You attempted to publicly shame a young woman with nothing but your assumptions to justify it. Claire tried again. I didn't know who she was, and that, Elijah said sharply, is exactly the problem. He turned to Elise. And you acted on hearsay. You searched a black teenager's belongings without evidence, without cause, because a wealthy woman whispered in your ear. Elise stammered. I was just trying to manage the situation. No, Elijah replied. You failed to manage it. You allowed bias to dictate your actions, and you've embarrassed not only yourselves but my daughter and this business. He turned back to Maya, then to the staff. This is unacceptable. Claire's voice cracked as she tried again. Had I known she was your daughter, you would have held your tongue? He asked. You would have extended her basic respect only if she belonged to someone important? Then your problem isn't just with her. It's with every person who walks into this boutique and doesn't fit your image of who belongs. The silence was suffocating. Claire reached for her bag. I think I'll just go. No, Elijah said. You won't. You're banned from this boutique and every other one under my name. You don't get to weaponize your privilege here and then walk away with pearls still around your neck. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but there were no words left. She left, her shoulders tight, her departure as quiet as her initial cruelty had been loud. Elijah turned to Elise. I suggest you take a long look at your staff training policies. If this is how you treat a young woman because she's black and confident, then you're not managing a boutique, you're perpetuating a problem. He then looked at Maya. Come on, he said softly. Let's go. But before they reached the door, Maya paused. She turned to the room one last time, her voice calm and unwavering. You don't have to know who someone is to treat them with dignity. And with that she walked out, her head held high, her shoulders unburdened. What had begun as a humiliation had become a reckoning. The boutique would never forget the day the CEO came, but more importantly, neither would the people who watched a black girl refuse to shrink and instead choose to rise. By the time Elijah and Maya stepped out onto Fifth Avenue, the city had resumed its usual rhythm. Horns honking, footsteps racing, conversations overlapping in 1,000 different directions. But for the people still inside that boutique and for those who would later hear the story, something irreversible had shifted. The confrontation was over, but its aftershocks were just beginning. News of the incident didn't spread in a viral firestorm at first. It started with whispers. The customer who had filmed the final exchange between Elijah and Claire uploaded the clip to social media with a caption that read, "She stood her ground. Her father stood beside her. That's what dignity looks like." Within hours, the video was being reshared by influencers, civil rights advocates, and parenting groups across the country. The story struck a nerve. In a world saturated with headlines that blurred into one another, Maya's quiet refusal to back down felt different. It wasn't staged or exaggerated. It wasn't loud or theatrical. It was simply honest, and that honesty resonated deeply. What happened inside the boutique reminded people not just of injustice, but of the everyday moments when courage is needed most. For some, it was a reminder of their own experiences. For others, it was a revelation. Comment sections filled with voices, some expressing outrage, others offering support. Mothers wrote about their own daughters, wondering how they would respond in Maya's shoes. Fathers reflected on how Elijah's presence reminded them of the weight they carried and the responsibility to show up not just as providers, but as protectors of their children's humanity. Educators began sharing the video in classrooms to spark discussions on racial bias, empathy, and the importance of standing up for oneself. But it wasn't just online. In the days that followed, something unexpected began to happen in the real world. Employees at the boutique chain Elijah owned began reaching out to corporate headquarters, not with complaints but with gratitude. Staff from stores in Chicago, Miami, and San Francisco wrote emails and left voicemails saying, "Thank you for showing us what leadership looks like." Others shared that they'd witnessed similar incidents but hadn't known how to intervene. Now they did. Elijah, who never sought the spotlight, released a brief but powerful statement. Everyone deserves to walk into a store, a classroom, a job interview, or anywhere, with the full dignity of being seen as human first. Maya didn't stand up for herself because of who her father is. She stood up because of who she is. And that's what I'm proud of. The boutique in question closed for a day, officially for staff development, but inside the atmosphere was anything but procedural. Elise, the manager who had faltered, now sat in the front row of a mandatory training led by a civil rights organization specializing in anti-discrimination practices in retail environments. During the session, when asked to reflect on what she would do differently, her voice trembled. "I would listen before reacting," she said. "And I would remember that perception isn't proof. I let someone's prejudice guide my action, and I betrayed a young woman's trust." The ripple continued to expand. In a high school in Atlanta, a group of students launched a campaign called "I Belong Here," encouraging young people of color to document the spaces where they had felt excluded and reclaim them with stories of resilience. In Los Angeles, a local journalist published an op-ed titled, "The Power of Being Seen," calling Maya's experience a masterclass in grace under fire. And in a small town in Ohio, a black teenager named Zaire read about Maya and wrote her a letter. "I used to think I had to shrink myself to stay safe," he wrote. "Now I think maybe I can walk taller." Maya, meanwhile, returned to her normal life, or tried to. She went back to school where some classmates approached her with wide eyes and reverence. "You're that girl, right? From the video." Maya would nod politely, smile, but never brag. The attention made her uncomfortable, not because she didn't appreciate the support, but because she hadn't done any of it for recognition. She had spoken because silence had never protected her before, and she didn't expect it to start now. Still, something in her had shifted too. She found herself sitting differently in classrooms, answering questions with more confidence, and lifting her chin slightly higher in hallways where she had once felt the need to make herself smaller. It wasn't about pride, it was about presence. She knew now, deeply and without question, that her presence was not just allowed, it was necessary. At home, she and Elijah spoke quietly about what had happened over dinner or late-night tea. They would unpack the events of that day piece by piece. "You didn't just teach them something, Maya," Elijah said one evening, his voice soft. "You reminded me of something too, that the next generation doesn't need our protection as much as they need our trust to stand on their own." Maya looked at him, her expression unreadable. "But you still showed up," she said. He smiled. "Always." The boutique never quite returned to business as usual. A framed statement was placed near the entrance. "We believe in dignity, equity, and the right of every person to feel welcome here. If you don't, this isn't your store." Some customers rolled their eyes. Most nodded in approval. A few left glowing reviews online, citing the new tone and the staff's increased attentiveness. But the biggest change wasn't in signage or social media. It was in the quiet choices people made differently each day. A customer standing up for another when something felt off. A manager pausing before reacting. A young black girl walking into a store with her head held high because someone like her had already done it and left a legacy in her steps. The ripple wasn't just a wave of awareness. It was a current of change. And at the center of it all was a teenager who had walked into a boutique hoping to find a dress and instead found her voice. As the boutique doors closed behind Maya and Elijah, the sharp click of her heels against the pavement was a different sound than when she first walked in. It was louder now, not because the shoes had changed but because she had. Each step held more weight, more grounding. She wasn't just exiting a store, she was leaving behind a moment that could have broken her but hadn't. Elijah walked beside her in silence, glancing at his daughter with quiet pride. He didn't say much, his presence had spoken volumes when it mattered most. But what lingered between them now was something deeper than reassurance. It was shared understanding, the unspoken knowledge that the world would keep trying to test her, but that she now carried proof of her own resilience. The city buzzed around them, but for Maya, time had slowed. The insults, the assumptions, the indignity, it had all happened in a matter of minutes, yet it had carved a new shape in her, one that would stay with her long after the headlines faded and the whispers quieted. She hadn't fought back with shouting or confrontation. She had met hostility with composure, condescension with clarity, and in doing so she had turned a moment of exclusion into one of power. As they reached the crosswalk, Elijah gently touched her shoulder. "You did good today," he said. Maya looked up at him, her eyes steady. "I didn't plan on it," she said with a quiet laugh. "I just didn't want to let her decide who I was." "You didn't," he replied. "You reminded her and everyone else who you are." That night, Maya sat on her bedroom floor with the dress still hanging in its protective bag, untouched since she'd left the boutique. She had chosen it for how it made her feel. Elegant, strong, unapologetically herself. But now it carried more meaning. It wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a symbol of a stand taken, a story rewritten. Outside her window the city kept moving, but inside, something within her had gone still, settled. She remembered every detail of the encounter. The weight of Claire's words, the hesitation in the manager's eyes, the way the room had frozen under the weight of accusation. But what stayed with her most was how she had not backed down, not once. Even when her voice wavered, her truth didn't. The following weekend, Maya wore the dress to her father's gala. Heads turned as she entered, not because of the gown's shimmer, but because of her poise. There was a new kind of light about her now, one that came not from spotlights or compliments, but from conviction. She walked across the marble floor with grace, greeting people with a smile that said, "I know who I am and I'm not shrinking for anyone." The gala was full of laughter and speeches, but the highlight of the evening came when Elijah stepped up to the podium. His speech, meant to honor the spirit of youth leadership, took an unexpected turn. "Tonight I'd like to share a story," he began, "not of business but of bravery." As he recounted what had happened in the boutique, the discrimination, the silence, the courage, people listened, eyes widening, expressions sobering. But when he spoke of Maya, of how she had handled herself with dignity in the face of prejudice, the room filled with something rare and electric: respect. Not the kind you inherit from wealth or titles, but the kind you earn from standing tall when it would be easier to sit down. When he finished, Maya rose from her seat to applause, not just as his daughter, but as someone who had become, in that moment, a symbol of strength for many who had ever been made to feel small. Later, as the crowd thinned and the music faded, a young girl approached her quietly, perhaps no older than 13. "You're Maya, right?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw the video. My mom showed it to me. I just wanted to say thank you. You helped me speak up at school last week when someone said I didn't belong." Maya knelt slightly to meet the girl's eyes. "You do belong," she said gently but firmly. "Always." The girl nodded and walked away, her steps a little more confident now. And Maya, standing beneath the soft glow of the gala's chandeliers, finally let herself breathe. She hadn't just walked out of a boutique taller. She had walked into her power and left the door open for others to follow. Maya Thompson's story began with a simple desire: to find the perfect dress for a special evening. What she didn't anticipate was that her moment of joy would be hijacked by prejudice, disguised in pearls and polite hostility. What unfolded in that boutique wasn't just a personal attack. It was a societal reflection, a mirror exposing the deeply rooted biases that still linger in spaces meant to celebrate beauty, class, and success. But Maya didn't break. She didn't lash out. Instead, she stood firm in her truth, embodying a quiet strength that spoke louder than any insult hurled her way. Her composure in the face of baseless accusations, her decision to call her father not to save her but to remind the world of her worth, was more than just a powerful scene. It was a reclaiming of space. It was a declaration that she belonged, not because of her last name or what her father owned, but because she, like anyone else, had value that didn't need permission to exist. And when Elijah Thompson walked in, not as a savior but as a witness to his daughter's courage, he sent a message not just to that boutique, but to anyone watching: dignity is not negotiable. The lesson here is profound. We live in a world where judgments are often made before words are spoken, where prejudice hides in plain sight under the guise of policy, preference, or tradition. But Maya's story teaches us that our worth isn't up for debate, and when challenged, our response doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Whether you're facing discrimination, witnessing it, or unknowingly perpetuating it, you have a choice: to shrink or to stand. Let this be a reminder to speak up, show up, and always choose respect. And if this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think differently, subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. Let's change the world, one voice at a time.